Everyone. Welcome to the third session in our Midwives 2 and 3 program. This program involved a series of webinars, all led by a midwife who has experienced mental health difficulties. As I mentioned, please note this is a recorded session, but you can remain anonymous if you choose. Only we will be seen, and you can change your name in the chat box if you wish. My name's Catherine. I work for Doctors in Distress, and we are an independent charity providing mental health support to all healthcare workers across the UK. We run programmes of peer support groups, which run from 4 to 10 weeks, and specialist-led webinars such as this one. Today the session is on the paradox of care, how to care when you feel broken, and will be led by Midwives Nicola Pattinson and in conversation with Vicky Sebire. There'll be time at the end for questions. You can pop them in the chat and the Q&A feature throughout the session, and we will come to them at the end and do our best to answer them for you. And you'll also be able to join on the mic if you feel like coming on to speak, whichever is most comfortable for you. But for now, I will pass over to Nikki and Vicky, and I hope that you enjoy today's session. So thank you both.
Hi everybody, my name is Nikki. I'm a midwife and I'm talking today with Vicky, who is also a midwife. We're both slightly nervous. We don't have a clue how many of you are out there, but I'm sure there's lots of people we know out there. So please forgive us if our voices are a bit wobbly at times. But I'm here today to facilitate a conversation with Vicky on her personal experiences with mental health in the workplace. And I want to really thank Vicky for being incredibly brave and agreeing to do this conversation today and to share her experiences with others. We really hope that you find it supportive and that it offers a little bit of hope. And I'll just let Vicky introduce herself.
So hi, I'm Vicky, for those of you who don't know me. I currently work as a hospital midwife, where I rotate between labour ward and the antenatal and postnatal wards. Before I came into the hospital's work, I worked in community as an integrated midwife for a little bit. I worked in the NHS since 2006 and qualified as a midwife in 2019. During this time, I've had some kind of emotionally and mentally kind of challenging environments to navigate. Some of these have been as part of my job, providing clinical care, and others have been a bit more unique, including working from home during the COVID lockdowns. I think for me, the reason I wanted to do this today was because more recently, I think I found that these experiences have really made me question myself and my ability to be a midwife. And at times it's had a really big impact on my mental health at work. And I think I've kind of recognised the significance of that, in that this is a really important conversation that we have to kind of open the doors about it, I guess.
Yeah, thank you, Vicky. And we're going to start by you giving us some sort of insight into how you felt on returning to work after a period of shielding during the initial lockdown during COVID. So yeah, how was that when you came back to work after that shielding period?
So I think, so when I had to go off and shield, I had only been qualified about 6 months. I had shielded for kind of various medical things that were happening at the time. I think I knew coming back to work after shielding was going to be really hard because I was still really newly qualified. I was at a new trust and I didn't really know anybody. I think before I started shielding, I had started to have a few like niggly doubts of, oh, I really don't like being newly qualified. Don't know if I'm cut out to be a midwife. But I think I'd just been trying to ignore kind of how that felt. And then having had the time out and working at home felt quite safe because I wasn't having to be involved in like the kind of clinical side of midwifery. So then coming back, having had that time out and having time to kind of ponder that, I guess, made being back at work feel much more difficult. Initially, I think I was really pleased to be back at work. But after a while, I really started to struggle. And for the first time in my life, I started to experience anxiety. I felt I didn't really know anything. I'd forgotten how to be a midwife, and I was constantly worrying I was going to miss something, whether that be for a woman on my caseload, because I just had a overriding fear of, oh my gosh, I'm the only person seeing this woman. if I mess this up, this is all on me. And then likewise in labour, just having really bad anxiety, I guess, that, or if I miss something here, the events could be catastrophic, couldn't they? They could be really bad, and that would all be on my shoulders. And that felt like a massive responsibility at the time, combined with having had a long period of time off. And I just, was really worried all the time something really bad was going to happen. Mainly because I didn't feel like I was a midwife. I felt like I was kind of pretending to be a midwife. And I didn't think I was particularly good at it either. I remember at that time those emotions feeling really heavy and really overwhelming. I felt out of my depth all the time, full of self-doubt, had no confidence in my judgment. And I was really frightened a lot of the time and really anxious. So I think I remember spending a lot of time crying around this point, whether that was the thought of going to work, like on my way into work in the car, or when I was at work, hiding in the toilets and having a bit of a cry. And I remember it being really lonely, and it was really tiring trying to hold it all together. I remember feeling like it was only a matter of time before someone would figure out that I didn't know what I was doing, or like a woman that I was looking after would realise, oh, you're not a very good midwife, you don't know what you're doing here. And it felt like my secret, and I felt too scared to tell anyone because I thought I would get in trouble for it, because I felt like I should be coping, even though I really wasn't. And I think that feeling of feeling like I should be coping, I do know why I felt like that. I think it was just all new, and I was ashamed, and I didn't want to tell anyone. And actually thinking back how that makes me feel now, like I know I'm a completely different person from that person back then, and it makes me feel really sad that I felt like I had to hide that. But I really vividly remember around that time feeling sorry for anybody I was looking after, because they had me looking after them rather than one of my colleagues who would definitely know what they were doing, and they were getting like a bit of a raw deal by having me look after them. And I can't believe I didn't tell anyone about it. Like, I can't believe I tried to keep that a secret for so long.
Yeah.
I think the point that probably changed was when I was on a night shift. I remember it now. It was a Saturday night. I was on labour ward and it was really busy, and I had a woman in labour, and I just thought, I can't do this. I don't want to be here. And I just wanted to walk out and leave that woman in labour and not have a midwife. Obviously I didn't, but I think it was at that point having that kind of thought go through my head of, I really don't want to be here, I just need to run away from this, that made me think I should probably need to tell somebody about how work is feeling for me at the moment.
Yeah.
And that was when I spoke to one of my colleagues who was amazing. They completely listened to what I was saying, validated like what I was feeling, and actually said, yeah, we can make a bit of a plan here, we can support you, and we can get work feeling okay. And I think one of the reasons that I felt ashamed to tell anyone because I remember when I came back from shielding, somebody had said to me, well, everybody else is fine, so I don't know why you're not. And I kind of thought, oh, okay, this is my issue then, this is me, I'm at fault here. And I felt really alone. And it wasn't till I then thought, actually, no, I think you're wrong, you other person, I'm going to go and speak to someone else, that things then started to change. And I think I realised that actually I was going to need to put some work in to make work feel okay. And I think to do that, I started just accepting how I felt. And I accepted that actually, yeah, this is me, this is where I'm at, newly qualified, I'm in a new trust, had quite a big chunk of time out, worked from home, which had its own challenges working from home. And I just stopped apologising for what, not in a rude way, I stopped apologising for what I didn't know. So instead of starting a conversation with, I'm really sorry, I don't know this, or I'm really sorry, I know I've asked you 10 times to help me today, would you be able to help me again? Or I'm sorry, but can you just explain that again? I just changed how I was phrasing things and just said, I don't know how I probably worded it. I just stopped saying the sorry part and just probably said, I need your help. I'm worried about this. Can you just give me some reassurance? And I think by starting to rephrase my language, that was really, I think that was probably really empowering for me. And I think that's probably when things started to change. And I remember being told a really good mantra at that point as well, which was, I'm a midwife, I can ask questions and I know what I'm doing. And I think I used to walk around chanting that to myself quite a lot at the time. And that, yeah, I think that's how things started turning around. And it wasn't like, I've made that sound like it was quite a simple process, but actually it probably took me like another year following this for work to feel okay. But I think doing that, just, I don't know, I guess just changing that mindset a little bit just started to change how I felt about myself. And it started to highlight to me what I knew, what I didn't know.
Yeah.
What am I going to do about this if I don't know something about it? And then I think things just changed and work started feeling better. And I think I had to put some other kind of things in place at that point. So I know naturally I tend to bottle things up. I tend to not kind of say anything about them, keep it down, and then eventually it all comes out and it kind of floods out when it normally comes out. And I think I realised that actually, no, I need to start talking about how this is feeling.
Yeah.
So I used to just go and see one of our PMAs every month and just have a chat about how work was feeling. Sometimes it was good, sometimes it wasn't. And then it got to the point where I thought, actually, I don't think I need to keep coming to see you anymore. And then I would also, I've kept a journal. So I just wrote loads of stuff down, even if it was waffle. I just wrote it down, and that started to help me understand why I was feeling like I was feeling. And then I guess, again, I started doing that less. And then time went by and
it felt better.
It felt better, yeah.
I think that was really brave, just reaching that. You obviously reached a point where you couldn't go on. And I think there's probably many people in healthcare that's felt in that position before. Have you had any significant periods of stress since then? And how did you cope with those in light of what you'd already learned? How did it then play out if you had any more experiences of stress?
So I think the last year at work, well, particularly like this time last year, I would say felt quite hard. And I suppose I was probably a bit more tuned into how work was feeling because of what had happened previously. So I think for the next bit, I've got some notes in front of me. I'm just going to read from my notes a little bit, just to prompt my brain, just because there's quite a lot of like emotion and memories around that time, and there's quite a lot to talk through, isn't there?
Yes, there is.
And it's good to just have it in some kind of chronological order for my head. So yeah, last year I found really hard, particularly this time last year. I was involved in a clinical incident which I found really challenging to move on from. This incident in particular was really serious, and I think aside from dealing with my emotions surrounding the incident itself, it triggered a lot of the anxieties and difficulties I'd had when I returned from shielding. Before it happened, work was feeling absolutely fine, like it was quite comfortable, didn't really have any problems, and it was in like a nice place. I think I'd come out the other side of kind of being newly qualified and returning from shielding, and I'd figured out what worked for me and what didn't work for me at that point. And then this one situation just kind of blew that all apart and exposed all of those vulnerabilities, and I didn't understand why it had. I knew how I was feeling, but I had a massive mind block and I just couldn't process any of it. I couldn't quite figure out why I was feeling like I did about the incident. And I don't think it was ever the incident itself. Well, it probably was to a certain extent, but not. It was just how that had made me feel and how vulnerable that had probably made me feel. And I knew that I needed to keep talking about how work was feeling after this, but it felt at times that talking about it made it feel a lot worse. Yeah. Because I suppose when you're not talking about it, it's almost not real in a way, is it? And actually, when you're starting to then talk about it, you're starting to say, okay, this actually happened. This is actually how I'm feeling, and I'm finding this really tough. And I think going back to the incident itself, like I remember feeling really sick with anxiety and just out of my depth. And And I felt like I wasn't the right person to be looking after this woman. I felt like I had a complete lack of experience. And I think it was that particular moment in the incident that kind of opened up this can of worms again for me. And just, I suppose, all those feelings of inadequacy came back to me again. And I was just completely overwhelmed by it and the complexity of the situation I was in. And I just remember having this really awful feeling, like a pit in the pit of my stomach, that something really bad was going to happen. And I think I can see now with hindsight, actually, I probably reacted in that way because it was the years before that had given me a bit of experience and made me question things. And I think that was probably a positive thing at that point, but at that time, it didn't feel like a positive thing. But I remember feeling like it was really hard to try and manage how I was feeling whilst also dealing with the situation.
Yeah.
And I think the days following this incident, probably they did impact on my home life. Like, I didn't really want to go out anywhere. I wanted to stay at home. It felt safe at home. I didn't want to talk to my friends about it, just because it's really hard to talk about kind of how you can feel as a midwife, isn't it? Like saying, actually, work's really tough. It's making me feel really anxious. This has happened, that's happened. Like, you can't say that. I didn't feel like I could say that because that would scare people. And then that in itself was more isolating, just because there was just a lack of people to talk to about it. And I think when I went back into work, I found I didn't have any time off around it. I just kind of made myself go back in because I knew actually by having time off, it was going to make these feelings of like isolation and worry just escalate even more. But it was really hard. It was really, really hard being back in work after that. And I just found myself overthinking everything, worrying, and just generally catastrophizing things. Like, I couldn't rationalize anything. And I just kept worrying about the what ifs. What if this happens? What if I don't do that? What if I don't do this? What's going to happen here? And I started apologizing a lot again for asking questions and needing reassurance. And I felt like I probably drove everybody mad at work around this point, because I think I was probably just quite needy and needing lots of reassurance. And that wasn't how work had been feeling. So it was really hard to go back to feeling kind of unsafe at work. And I think that kind of the psychological safety element of things had disappeared for me around here. I just had fear and worry at the back of my head constantly, and I was just terrified of experiencing a similar thing again, or not necessarily experiencing that situation again, but just the kind of, could I cope with it element again, like not feeling, I suppose, feeling mentally strong enough to deal with it. And I know I was probably really quite low and withdrawn around that time, and I think it was like the weeks following it that I started really, really questioning whether I could be a midwife anymore. Because I knew from what had happened that I needed to just carry on going in. I wanted to avoid going into work, is the truth. I really wanted to avoid going into work. But it was really hard. And I think I got to the point with that where I thought, actually, this is not subsiding. Like, everybody's had tough days at work before. And, normally a couple of days or a week later, I felt okay, but this really wasn't shifting for me. And I couldn't really process why that wasn't shifting. So in the end, I ended up seeing a counsellor through work who gave me some really good techniques. So she gave me some good safety phrases to use. So I can't say what the actual incident was, but we spoke about having a bank of phrases that I could use if I was asked a certain question, which would make it easy to just spiel off that response without having to think about the emotions attached to it, which might then take me back to how work had been feeling.
Okay.
Or how it felt in that incident anyway. And I think one of the most important things she taught me was to actually treat myself with the kindness that I would treat a colleague if they had been in that situation. And I think that was that was a good thing for me to know, but it was also quite hard because I think I'd realised I was probably being quite harsh on myself and expecting myself to just kind of get on with it. Whereas actually, as soon as I started thinking, oh, if that had happened to one of my colleagues, I'd probably be really, I'd probably try and support them and try and be kind towards them. And I wasn't really showing myself that. I was expecting myself just to toughen up and get on with it.
Yeah.
And I suppose it comes back to that old word resilience, doesn't it? I didn't feel like I was resilient enough when actually I wasn't the issue here. It was the environment I was in which was the issue. And she also gave me like some other techniques to use, so things like acknowledging, and you've had a day, and I had to do this quite a lot afterwards, had a day at work, think about the good things and the bad things, acknowledge the bad things because they happen, or you feel how you do following a bad thing, but actually try and focus on the good stuff a bit more and try and think, okay, well, that one bad thing, these 5 really good things have happened today. And it was about kind of starting to shift my mindset back to work can feel safe again, because I think that was a really big thing for me around then. The work, I didn't feel safe being in work. I didn't know how to overcome that or kind of where that feeling had come from.
What good things were you recognising? Were they quite small, simple things?
I think they really were. I think they really were small things like,
I had a cup of tea.
I had a cup of tea and I had a nice lunch, or I felt like I gave some good care today, or I feel like I trusted my instinct, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And the bad things, they're also important to remember because they're a reminder, aren't they, of why we're doing the job we're doing.
Yeah.
And I think something else that I learned around that point was actually, if you're involved in an incident and you can't remember bits of it, particularly how you might have responded to something, then there's a good sign that that kind of aligns with your morals and your ethics, because actually if something's happened or you've responded in a way that isn't in line with those, then I lost my train of thought completely.
So then it would be more in your mind.
It would be more in your mind, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think the other part of last year, which I found quite hard, was once I'd started to make a bit of progress on being in work and work feeling okay again and starting to get back to some kind of normality in work, then had a bit of a second incident, which wasn't as bad as the first one, but it was enough to undo quite a lot of the work I had done after the first incident. And I think for me, it surrounded just having a lack of control over everything. And that second incident just confirmed that actually all this time I'd spent worrying around the what ifs, they just became a reality. And it just confirmed, actually, yeah, you're right to be worrying about that, or you're right to be feeling like that. And it just completely justified it for me as something that I hadn't just made up in my head. And it was actually something that could happen. And I know I had colleagues at the time saying, oh, these things, they don't happen very often. I've been a midwife for 20 years and I've never seen any of these things. But that didn't help me at that point.
No. Because
that wasn't my reality of how actually a few years after being qualified felt. And I think the second incident just made being in work again so much tougher, to the point where I was then thinking of excuses not to go to work. So like, oh, I wonder if my kids might have a temperature, or oh, I wonder if I've got a bit of a sore throat, if I've got a bit of a cough coming, if I've got a cold coming, maybe I need to have a day off work. And I never did have a day off work, but it just started, then you just start thinking, oh, okay, you really don't want to be in work, do you? You don't normally make excuses like that not to be in work.
It's been quite tiring as well.
It was really tiring, really, really tiring. And I would spend the day before I was going into work, worrying about work, wondering what might happen, and just feeling really miserable and constantly on the edge of tears about it, which actually, for anybody that knows me, knows that I don't really cry that easily. It takes quite a lot of things to build up to make me cry. And I know it was just, I just didn't feel safe being at work, like mentally safe. And I felt really ashamed to admit it. And I felt like I couldn't say anything to my colleagues, because we're talking like months down the line here. I thought they would think, oh, you're really weak. aren't mentally strong enough, you can't deal with really complex situations, you're always needing support, you're always saying you're worried about stuff. And I thought, my God, I felt like I was a hindrance to them at that point. And I know I wasn't, and none of them actually said it, but it's just your mind, isn't it? It just starts thinking, you just start thinking, oh, they're thinking that about me because, she's got problems again, or she's not wanting to do these things. And I think by not saying anything, that made it so much harder, because it was in turn then making me question everything about myself.
Yeah.
And I seriously questioned whether I could carry on being a midwife. I was thinking, can I come back from this? Like, is this just what work is going to feel like for me now? Is work always going to be this struggle? And I think to a certain extent, once that little can of worms has opened, it's always going to be a bit of a juggling act. And sometimes it's okay. And majority of the time it is fine, but then it doesn't often take a lot to make it not feel okay again. And I think, it got to the point, particularly back then, where I think I felt like I was on the edge of having a breakdown, because I just had like a constant narrative in my head of, you can't do this, you can't be a midwife, you're not mentally strong enough. How are people still doing this like 30 years later? How are they still coping? And they seem completely fine by it. I think that was another thing then that I'd said to one of my colleagues, I was like, how are you okay about what has happened? And she said, oh, I am. I know I've done everything. So I know I couldn't have done anything more. So yeah, that's it. It's okay. And I was like, why am I not like that? Why is this so much bigger for me? Why am I struggling with this so much? And then that then fed into that, oh, maybe I can't be a midwife. Maybe this is a sign that this isn't for me. But I think this carried on for quite a long time, this constant kind of battle in my head around work. And I think I just got to the point where I thought, oh, well, maybe I'm depressed. And then I think with that thought, I thought, no, you're not depressed. You're not going to let your job and your work have that hold over you. Like, it's just not going to happen. You've got too much good stuff going on in your life. But I think, and I've made that sound really easy, because actually I did feel really low and miserable at that time.
Yeah.
But I think I just started to, I'm just trying to remember how I did it now. I think I just started to kind of like think, okay, this has happened, but I'm not going to let that define me. That's not going to be who I am as a midwife, and that's not going to be the end of my job. Like, I'd worked on the ambulances, and you saw so many like really stressful and traumatic things. And I don't think at that time I kind of acknowledged what they were or how they made me feel. And, I did that job for 6 years before I left it. And I thought, do you know what? This is the same thing playing out again. I'm not going to let that happen. I'm not going to let myself get to the point where work feels so bad that I need to leave and I need to find another job. And I think I learned that I needed to just sit with how I felt, sit with my emotions, stop apologizing for them again, and just let it be. And I think every time I had a thought of, oh, this is feeling a bit worrying, or feeling a bit wobbly, or starting to go back to the incident itself, I think I just used to almost envisage a box and think, right, okay, you can think that, absolutely fine to think it, but it goes in the box now. We don't do anything more about it. And I think in time it just started to get better.
And did you continue your counselling through that period as well?
No, I only had a few sessions. But I think I probably did quite a lot of soul searching, I think, around last year. And I think I learned probably more about myself. I learned about myself as a midwife, and I don't know, work feels fine now. Like, there are things that still are a bit triggering, but actually they're not as bad as they were back then. And I think actually time's been a really big thing for me in there. The first time you then encounter the similar situations again, like I remember one particular thing I completely freaked out over, and I was like, oh, no, this is it, I can't do this anymore. but I stuck at it and I made myself do it. And then actually having then been in that same situation quite a few times since, it's now fine and it's not a problem. But it's always going to be, I think, in the back of my mind. But I think that's okay. Like, I think it's just something I've got to work on, and I guess it's just finding the balance, isn't it, of trying to look after someone but being able to separate my emotions, and that can be really hard.
It can be hard. Is there any sort of tricks where you can, or not tricks, but ways in which you can think this is not just all about me, there's other people in this picture, and it's not just my responsibility all the time? Because it sounds like you take on the whole scenario.
Yeah, there is. And the counsellor I saw talking about like the pie of responsibility. So it's basically a pie. Each have pie like, and I think initially I was thinking that's my pie. I've got that whole pie. I am responsible for that entire pie and everything that happens within that pie. And she actually helped me to break it down a bit. Actually, I'm only at max ever going to have 50% of that pie. The woman's always going to be 50% responsible. And then when you start breaking it down into, oh, you've got a community midwife, you've got other hospital midwives, you've got your doctors, you've got your MSWs, your auxiliaries, the whole wider team, your bit of pie comes really quite tiny. And that made managing work, and it still does make managing work, particularly when you're trying to like multitask and stuff, feel much better. Because I think at one point I wanted that whole pie. I thought that whole pie was mine and I couldn't figure out how to sort it out.
And on some days it'd be more than one pie.
Yeah, it would. Yeah, especially like when you're working on the ward and it's busy, you're thinking, oh, we've got like 11 pies here and I haven't got enough hands for them. I don't know what I'm doing. And I don't know how to manage it. But yeah, I think it helped put some perspective on it for me, I think. And yeah, work just got better with time, I guess.
That's good. And do you think, have your family noticed a difference in how you cope? Because they must have been impacted a little bit.
I think they were. I think particularly like this time last year, I think they knew I was not myself. But I think it's made me be more open with my husband, particularly around how work felt, because I think I'm a bit of a bottler and I just try and deal with all in my head and never say anything. And then I think actually after this, kind of last year stuff, that was really impossible to hide at home. And I think I had to say work isn't feeling okay. And I think even like the thought of talking about this a year ago, probably it would have been too much. Like it would have been. But yeah, I don't know. I guess it does. Yeah.
And so just to sort of bring our conversation to a bit of a close, see if anybody's got any questions. What one thing, Vicky, would you advise other people who might find themselves in this situation to do to support their mental health at work?
I would say give it time and talk to someone. That has been, talking to somebody has probably been one of the biggest things for me. I think midwifery's probably opened up my emotions a bit, because I was very kind of plateau with things before, whereas now I know I'm much more up and down. But actually talking about it and being accountable for talking about it helps too. And actually I think it's taught me some empathy, because I think I never used to kind of know what the stress was. I think very naively I was like, no, don't get stressed. But yeah, I do think just talking about it, finding kind of who you want to talk about, who you feel safe to talk about it with, and not normalizing how you're feeling, but kind of normalize talking about it, I think is a really big thing. And just having that open dialogue where you can phone a friend and say, oh, I've had a really bad day, this has happened, and you just debrief after a shift, and that works well for me. But I think sometimes it can be hard to have those conversations at work, just because it is really busy and you might only get snippets of time and it's hard to open up. I find it hard to open up if I'm thinking, oh yeah, I could have a really honest conversation with you here, how I'm feeling, but somebody else might walk into the office or somebody else might come along, and it's hard to get to that place where you feel safe enough to talk about it.
Yeah.
And I'm just trying to think if I've got any other notes to add to that. I don't think I do.
No. I think that being willing to do this is really, I've said it's really brave, but I think it's also testament of how much work you've put in to support yourself mentally, but also how much how strong your feelings were towards midwifery and how you didn't want to walk away from it and you wanted to stick with it, and you've really worked hard to do that. So thank you for talking to me today. I know it wasn't easy, but we'll open the floor for any questions if there's anybody out there.
Yeah, thank you both so much. Vicky, thank you for being so open and kind of sharing your story and your experiences. If anyone does have any questions, there is a Q&A feature, or you can pop them in the chat and we'll pick them up, or you can do the little hands up feature and we can bring you on the mic to talk. We've also got Caroline. Is there anything you'd like to ask?
It's just Caroline, Lou and Beth, and we just wanted to say we're so proud, and we're so proud to be working with you.
And you're a great midwife.
Amazing midwife.
Oh, thanks, guys.
You're just
Oh, we have another hand up. Mayor, apologies if I'm pronouncing that wrong. Please do let me know, but please go ahead with your question or whatever you'd like to say.
Gosh, do you know, I don't actually know. I think it's really hard to answer that question. I was chatting to one of my friends actually who works in well, I don't know if I want to say where she works, somewhere else to do with maternity, but not with us. And she was saying that in her job they really regularly get like monthly debriefs on things. So they like sit down with somebody every month and they chat it through. And I think, I don't know, having a bit more accessibility to kind of talking to somebody would be really beneficial. But I don't know, I think it's so individual though. Like I know for me, it took a long time to open up, and I wonder if, unless you were in the place where you're thinking, actually, I know I need to say something about this, whether having that forum would work. Do you know what I mean? Or
I mean, you have talked about outside of this, you never felt there was a safe space to go. You always felt that somebody could walk in at any point. So I think something around safe spaces for people to be able to have private conversations, which is difficult when trusts are so short of space.
And I wonder as well that, like, you know how we've got like escalation phrases at work to do with like kind of clinical stuff. If there was an escalation phrase for I'm feeling really wobbly today, or I'm finding this really hard, that would actually be heard, because I feel like over, you know, in the past, I've kind of tried to say, I'm finding this really hard, and it's been, you'll be okay, it'll be okay. And actually you're thinking, this really isn't okay, and it's taken so much like guts to come and say this to you, for you to kind of dismiss that almost. And I wonder if some kind of safety phrase around me as a midwife, I'm feeling really wobbly, or even an MSW or doctor, or, you know, anybody we're working with can kind of go to somebody and say, I'm not feeling okay, I need you to listen to me. I don't know, it's a bit of a hard
in the same way as we have that for women.
It's
a good idea.
Thank you. And what else? We've had an anonymous participant just say, thank you for sharing something so personal and vulnerable. Did you ever find people were unsupportive and critical of you, and how did you respond to this?
I don't know that they were ever critical. I don't even know if they were unsupportive. I think that there were probably comments that were unsupportive at times, if I'm really honest. But then I think for me, I knew that I needed to ignore those comments, and I knew that I needed to do something more. And I think that is really dependent on who you are as a person. Like, I'm a fairly confident person, and I think actually outside of work, that's really different to be being in work sometimes. Does that make sense? And I think that you've got, I don't know, for me anyway, I knew I needed to have enough kind of get confidence, I guess, and skills to say, I don't agree with you there, or I need some more help, I suppose. I don't know, it's a bit of a wishy answer, isn't it? I don't really know what to answer to the question.
I think as well, once you've found the people that you know you can trust,
Yeah,
you know who you can go to, don't you? And it's sort of finding your people, your you know, that you can go to.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Thank you. And Miranda has said, I want to mirror what Caroline, Lou, and Beth said. You are an amazing midwife, and I am always happy to know I will work a shift with you. I have felt very similar to what you have described, and I'm only now, maybe, just about getting to where you are. So thank you for being so brave and sharing your experience. You rock. I also saw Emma May, you had your hand up as well. Is there anything you'd like to say?
I think having like timely debriefs helps as well. Like trying to do it like this particular instance, we didn't have debriefs for months after actually. And by that point, I was kind of started to put work in and felt okay. Whereas actually, I wonder if we'd had it sooner, it might have changed how that felt. But I don't know.
Yeah. Vicky, Trish asks, is there any comment/action that would be supportive that would have made you feel listened to?
Oh, I don't know. I don't think I ever wasn't listened to. I think the difficulty I have, particularly, so the last year stuff, I really felt listened to, and I felt supported with that. And actually, everybody's been brilliant at work. I think how coming back from shielding felt harder because I didn't know anybody and nobody knew me. So whilst I was kind of feeling really lonely and withdrawn, that probably came across as just being quiet. And so I guess nobody would have thought, oh, you don't look like you're okay. Whereas now I think if that happened, they would be like, okay, yeah, you're not okay. How can we do?
You're not being like Vicky.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's the difference, I guess, isn't it? That I don't know, just it's having people around, isn't it? Really,
Yeah,
I think.
absolutely.
But I don't know, I suppose I think things in our trust anyway have changed quite a lot from when I was newly qualified, in that it seems anyway that there's more kind of support in place, which is brilliant. And yeah, I think that hopefully is helping.
Thank you. And then we've also got a participant has said, I have attempted to raise concerns about how I have been feeling at work with various members of staff and have found the general response is very dismissive, such as, yeah, it's tough, or I know it's really hard. Just put a brave face up. I found this so hard. Often we have PMAs passing in the corridor and asking how we are, but there is never really an appropriate time to actually really say how things are. Thank you for explaining how you approached this. If anyone else has any more questions or would like to come on the mic, please do pop them in the box. Just while we wait, if there's any more questions to come through in the chat, I've just popped my email in case anyone would like to get in touch to find out more about our programs or what Doctors in Distress does. And also if anyone has any questions that they want to pass via me, and I can always email them over to Vicky at the end and we can set up a response. I've also popped in the link to our Eventbrite. If you follow us, you can be notified when we launch a new program, because we are planning to do another set of 3 webinars for midwives in the spring, summertime. So you can be notified when they launch. But does anyone else have any questions? I can't see any for the time being. Nikki, Vicky, do you have anything else that you'd kind of like to say, or?
No, thanks for listening.
Yeah, thanks for listening.
Fab. Okay, well, like I said, if anyone does have any more questions, please feel free to pop me an email and I can always pass them on. But if there's no further questions, then thank you so much again, Nikki and Vicky, for leading today's session. We will export this recording and we'll share it with you via Eventbrite within the next week or so. So do look out for that. As I said, please feel free to email me anything about the work Doctors in Distress does or about our future programmes. And I really hope that you found today's session really useful. And thank you all so much for coming. I hope you have a great rest of the week. And yeah, thank you again, Nikki, Vicky, and take care, everyone. Thank you so much.
Thank you.